In a lot of games, NPCs have a place where they belong. A shopkeeper works at the same shop, residents live in the same town, and unless a quest or a scripted event causes something to change, you can usually expect to find those characters in the same place. For Adventure, my Sandbox RPG Sim, I want NPCs to be able to move throughout the world without those movements needing to be heavily scripted. This creates a design problem. How should an NPC decide where to live and when it's time to leave? My current solution is a set of behavioral traits that I'm calling settlement archetypes. Settlement archetypes are a set of behavioral traits that help NPCs determine where to live and when to move. Different games will require different archetypes, but these are the three that I've settled on for Adventure. The settler, which finds a settlement, becomes a citizen and will stay there permanently unless forced out. The wanderer, who finds a settlement, becomes a citizen and will stay there temporarily. And then finally, the nomad, who finds a settlement, does not become a citizen and will stay there temporarily. The settler represents the typical NPC behavior that you see in games where NPCs will live in a location and remain there throughout the playthrough. Having NPCs remain in one place helps establish a sense of normalcy within the game world. It also gives players the option to settle down themselves and spend a prolonged period of time in a single location while being surrounded by many of the same NPCs. So how do settler NPCs decide where their next home should be if they don't currently have one? Here's a full process that the NPC will go through when answering this question. First, does the NPC already have a home? If they do, the process stops. But if they don't have a home, another question has to be answered. Does the NPC know of any settlements? If yes, they can randomly select one to make their new home. If they don't, they'll have to go out and discover a settlement. And then at that point, the NPC will just wander the game world until they discover a settlement and will then make that settlement their permanent home. Settlers are meant to create familiarity within a single place, while wanderers are meant to create familiarity across multiple places. The wanderer archetype creates opportunities for players to unexpectedly encounter NPCs they've met before without those encounters needing to be scripted. For example, the player might regularly buy items from a blacksmith in their starting town before leaving to explore the world. Several in-game months later, they could arrive at a completely different settlement and unexpectedly find that same blacksmith living and working there. The blacksmith didn't move because the player left or because a scripted event required them to. They simply decided it was time to move on, chose another settlement, and continued their life there. Wanderers use the same process as settlers to find their next home. The difference is that wanderers have an additional decision to make, which is it time to go? But I guess before you can even really answer that question, you have another question, which is how long is long enough? So the length itself can vary, of course, but I prefer to set a hard deadline of 1 in-game year for Adventure. So if they haven't been there any longer than a year, they'll continue living there. But if they have been there for at least a year, they'll begin the process of looking for a new settlement to live in. Being that settlers and wanderers will stick around in locations for a set amount of time, the player can consistently make plans to interact with those NPCs for their needs. The nomad archetype's goal is to add some inconsistency to who the player can expect to find in a location. Compared to settlers who will stay in a location for as long as possible and wanderers who will stay for a year, nomads have a randomized time frame ranging from 1 in-game day to 1 month. This gives the player a limited and unpredictable amount of time to interact with them. For example, the player may encounter a nomad who knows the location of a rare artifact. If the player doesn't get that information before the nomad leaves, there's no guarantee they'll encounter that character again anytime soon. Another thing that makes the nomad stand out is that they won't seek citizenship in the settlement like the other archetypes. Becoming a citizen comes with perks, but also responsibilities that nomads would rather not bother with. For example, being a citizen will allow you to purchase a residence within town, but you'll also have to pay property taxes. Citizenship also gives characters more opportunities to establish connections to a settlement. They may own property, work a local job, join organizations, or develop relationships with other residents. These connections can leave behind evidence that the character once lived there even after they've moved away. Nomads are less likely to leave that kind of footprint behind. They may stay at an inn or camp outside of town, interact with the settlement for a short period of time, and then move on. This can make them much harder for the player to track down once they leave. Nomads don't require a completely different decision-making process from the other archetypes. They use the same process as wanderers to determine when it's time to leave, and the same process as settlers to determine where to go next. Settlement archetypes are ultimately a way of creating different NPC behaviors through relatively small changes to the rules they follow. The exact archetypes a game needs will depend on the type of world it's trying to simulate. For adventure, these three archetypes give me a starting point for creating a population where some characters put down roots, some periodically move on, and others are just simply passing through.